Sanctions against Russia remain one of the most effective tools for limiting its aggression. What's needed now is a truly strong 18th package of EU sanctions against Russia. The key targets should be Russia's oil trade, its shadow tanker fleet, Russian banks and other financial instruments, and the supply chains that bring equipment or parts for making weapons. The facts are clear. For Russia's appetite for war to shrink, its oil revenues must shrink. So please support further steps to lower the price cap on Russian oil. And a cap of $45 could help move toward peace, of course, but for real, lasting peace, and we shared it yesterday, and with all the partners, Europe partners, United States partners, a cap of $30 per barrel is needed to block Russia's ability to fund its aggression.
U.S. President Donald Trump has agreed to impose sanctions on Russia. Trump is fed up with Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, U.S. intel suggests strikes on Iran did not destroy nuclear sites. When did Trump agree to impose sanctions on Russia, and what is the current assessment of the U.S. strikes on Iran? Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said that Trump supported the sanctions bill. Graham claims that there is a big breakthrough in the issue of sanctions against Russia, and during a golf game with Trump told him that it's time to act, to move the bill forward. Quote, "The day after the July recess, we will adopt the bill." Senator expressed confidence that the U.S. president will sign the bill. Senator Graham, also his Democratic colleague Richard Blumenthal and other senators have submitted a bill that would provide additional sanctions against Russia for refusing to make a ceasefire deal, including introduction of 500% tariff on goods imported from countries that buy Russian oil. It would allow President to impose tariffs on China, India, and other countries to force them to stop supporting Putin's war machine and force Putin to sit down at the negotiating table. The bill also has support in the House of Representatives. However, Lindsey Graham confirms that the bill he initiated would not entail mandatory sanctions against Russia. The final decision will be made by the U.S. president. Graham says that the sanctions bill designed to increase sanctions on Russia has the support of Trump and will be adopted in July. At the same time, Senator emphasized several times that the bill contains a provision that leaves the imposition of sanctions at the discretion of Trump. Quote, "There is a waiver in bill. Mr. President, you decide whether to apply sanctions, but we will give President Trump a tool that he does not have." He added that it will depend on the U.S. president how to apply sanctions in the future, but Trump's team is trying to force Putin to sit down at the negotiating table. In early June, the Wall Street Journal reported that demand to leave the final decision on the sanctions with Trump came from the White House. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron is saying that he still believes Washington could back stronger sanctions against Russia. Macron said he had discussed further sanctions against Russia with Trump, and American president had reassured him that Washington was ready to take actions. Quote, "He answered quite positively, this is very good news for me." Also, the European Commission wants G7 countries to agree to cut the price cap on Russian oil, a key sanction targeting President Putin's war machine from $45 to $60 per barrel. Quote, "If in the coming weeks the Europeans and Americans jointly impose these sanctions, the situation will truly be transformed because the ability of the Russian economy to resist will really be called into question." Also, U.S. President Donald Trump reportedly describes the situation in Ukraine as totally out of control and says he will speak to Putin without providing any kind of details during NATO summit, according to Bloomberg. Meanwhile, NATO has just surrendered Ukraine, according to the Telegraph columnist. Donald Trump secured a diplomatic triumph as his advocacy for increased European defense spending transformed into reality. The final summit communique in Hague proclaimed NATO's commitment to devote 5% of its budget to defense, reaffirming its support for Article 5 collective defense. This success should have enhanced Europe's confidence against the Russian threat. However, NATO summit left the alliance's eastern flank in a state of deep concern. Trump's provocative remarks regarding the Article 5 caused doubt on whether NATO would rise to confront Russia's escalating array of hybrid threats. The feeling of betrayal in Ukraine is rising as NATO summit reluctance to condemn Russia's full-scale invasion and marginalization of President Zelensky underscores the alliance's growing fatigue with Ukraine, while NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says that familiar promise of Ukraine's irreversible path towards membership is still in action. His words rank increasingly hollow. The summit's attitude toward Ukraine concerned reflect a dangerous trend. At the same time, Russia's summer offensive in Ukraine is faltering just weeks after it began, despite a record number of attacks across front lines, according to the analysis done by The Telegraph. Russia's offensive is now faltering. In summer, Russian forces have stalled after re-entering in January and making little progress. Ukraine has managed to reclaim some territory and slow Russian advances, largely due to Russian deploying poorly trained soldiers. At the same time, Putin announced plans to reduce military spending after warnings about recession. He stated that defense spending would be cut over the next 3 years during an economic summit in Minsk. In response to NATO's plans to increase defense spending, he criticized their defense habits. Despite 4.3% growing, Russia faces high inflation, with interest rate maintained at 20%. This inflation is driven by Western sanctions and Putin's war against Ukraine. Also, there are labor shortages. Moscow Higher School of Economics reported a shortage of 2.6 million employees. The Kremlin is offering high wages and bonuses to attract soldiers, but private industry are struggling with lower demand and high debt. Banking officials have warned of a potential crisis as more businesses fall behind on loan payments. Additionally, war veterans poses a future threat in cost to Putin's regime, with half of the 140,000 soldiers returning to home. Meanwhile, the United States has intercepted communication among senior Iranian officials that suggests and shed a new light on the recent U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear program. According to full Washington Post sources, this communication reveals that Iranian leaders were taken aback by strikes directed by President Trump, finding them less destructive than expected. The intercepted discussions show Iranian officials are surprised about the minimal impact of attacks. This stands in stark contrast to Trump's statements about completely obliterated Iranian nuclear program. Analysts across the board, however, agree that the U.S. unleashed significant firepower on Iranian nuclear program using bunker-buster bombs and Tomahawk cruise missiles that damage key nuclear facilities in Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. Yet the extent of this damage remains contested. Reports indicate that Iran may have relocated stockpiles of uranium prior to the strikes. And also, when confronted about the recent intercepted communication, Trump's administration official dismissed these claims, asserting, quote, "We have destroyed their metal conversion facility." During classified briefings, CIA Director John Ratcliffe informed lawmakers that the key nuclear sites were destroyed, particularly Iran's metal conversion operation, which are crucial for building a bomb's explosive core and would take years to reconstruct. Trump has expressed his frustration with media coverage diverging from claims regarding the bombing mission, which have led to a ceasefire between Iran and Israel after 12 days of direct war. At the same time, US President Trump celebrated recent Supreme Court ruling as a monumental victory, which curtails the power of individual judges to issue nationwide injunctions that have obstructed his agenda. Trump hails the divided Supreme Court's decision on Friday, which determines that judges do not possess the authority to impose nationwide injunctions. However, the ruling left uncertain the fate of Trump's changes to birthright citizenship. This landmark ruling is viewed as a decisive win for the Republican president and the Republican Party, who has frequently voiced his frustration over individual judges creating obstacles to his agenda.
Well, this was a big one, wasn't it? This was a big decision. An amazing decision, one that we're very happy about. This morning, the Supreme Court has delivered a monumental victory for the Constitution, the separation of powers, and the rule of law in striking down the excessive use of nationwide injunctions to interfere with the normal functioning of the executive branch. The Supreme Court has stopped the presidency itself. That's what they've done. And really, it's been an amazing period of time this last hour. There are people elated all over the country. I've seen such happiness and spirit. Sometimes you don't see that, but this case is very important. I was elected on a historic mandate, but in recent months we've seen a handful of radical left judges effectively try to overrule the rightful powers of the president to stop the American people from getting the policies that they voted for in record numbers. It was a grave threat to democracy, frankly, and instead of merely ruling on the immediate cases before them, these judges have attempted to dictate the law for the entire nation. In practice, this meant that if any one of the nearly 700 federal judges disagreed with the policy of a duly elected president of the United States, he or she could block that policy from going into effect or at least delay it for many years, tie it up in the court system. This was a colossal abuse of power which never occurred in American history prior to recent decades, and we've been hit with more nationwide injunctions than were issued in the entire 20th century together. Think of it, more than the entire 20th century, me. I'm grateful to the Supreme Court for stepping in and solving this very, very big and complex problem, and they've made it very simple. I want to thank Justice Barrett, who wrote the opinion brilliantly, as well as Chief Justice Roberts, and Justices Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Thomas. Great people.
That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and glory to Ukraine.